Have you just found out the results for where you're going to be allocated as a junior doctor? Did you miss the boat and get thrown out of London? Well, that happened to me. And unluckily for Ams, he was in central London. This week, we're going to talk about the difference between working as a junior doctor in London compared to anywhere else in the country. If you don't know us, my name is Abdul. I'm joined with Ams. We're both junior doctors working in London now. We're the co-founders of Peerr and we host Scrubbed In podcast. So Ams, topical debate. We know a lot of people have got the results for where they're going to be doing their foundation training. If you are placed outside of London, what does that mean?
We've said it before in a previous episode, haven't we? So wherever you are in the country, don't let it affect your morale in terms of opportunity. There's a small few differences that does exist, and we've experienced it between me and you, and we'll go through that. But I think, as you said, in the long run, if you want to be a cardiologist, if you want to be a neurosurgeon, if you want to be a general surgeon, a urologist, whatever, in the long run, it all averages out and location does not matter. So you can leave now if you want. But anyways, let's continue. So talk a little bit about now talk about emotions first, I think, because a lot of people I think will resonate with that. So I think a lot of Londoners especially, right, were built to say, I want London, I want GSTT, Royal London Hospital, St. George's, all the big trauma centres and in and around all these hospitals, right? How did you feel when you found out you're being sent to a city that you've never even visited? A lot of people feel like that. Remember our friend Osama, he got sent out to a town, I don't even know what it's called. What is it called?
Lincoln. I think it's called Lincoln.
And then the place inside that, where is he?
No idea.
The small village is in. I don't even know what that's called. So how did it feel for you?
So for me, I was confident that I got a deanery in London. I was confident, I smashed my SJT. Yeah. I did all right in my EPM. And it was, how it is, you sit medical finals and you're like, yeah, I've kind of passed, but like maybe I failed. But on the whole, like you've got through it, right? Yeah. Same as deanery allocations. I thought, yeah, I'm going to work in London. I've been here my whole life. I went to King's. I'm familiar with the hospitals, right? And I remember the day of the allocations, it came out and it mentioned South Midlands, Coventry. And I thought it was some part of London. And I called you and you're like, no, you're like in the Midlands, Coventry, which is a whole different city. Yeah. And I was in... Do you know what? I was in denial. Remember, like I couldn't accept the fact that I was in Coventry, and I did everything I could to appeal it, to like, see if I can change it. Right? Obviously, nothing worked, and for me, it was devastating. It was proper devastating, especially when you've got it, like you've built in your head this scenario where you're going to be working as a junior doctor in London, right? And now all of a sudden you have to move 100 miles away to Coventry, away from your friends and family, to a city like you mentioned I've never been before. It was heartbreaking. Like it took me months to get over it. Yeah. And even while working, I never got over it. Even though I did F1, F2, I never really got over it. But the key thing that I learned, and I would say it was a blessing in disguise, was it shows that there is hype about working in a major city like London. Let's not deny it, it's true. Absolutely. But it does not affect the quality or how you are as a doctor. If you have not been allocated London as a deanery, it does not mean you're any lesser of a doctor than someone who's in a random town in the Midlands or wherever it may be.
I agree.
Yes, that was kind of my experience.
I think what's important to also say is that just because you're in London does not mean that you're by default a fantastic, amazing doctor. And just because you're out of London does not mean the opposite of that.
So how was your experience? So obviously you probably didn't think about it twice, but how was it for you?
So obviously, emotionally, right? It's weird. Like, so obviously I had my head in the books, right? Again, I'm a very strategic person. I know I play my cards in a way that I want it to be played. So the things that I had in my control were the things like EPM, the publications, all of that jazz, maxed out on all of that. Okay. So the only thing I didn't get, I think, was the PhD point that I couldn't get. SJT wise, right? A lot of people say you can't prepare for it. It's luck, blah, 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 blah. I think they're lying. I think they just didn't understand the exam, how to revise for it, right? We've sat the MSRA, and that's got an SJT segment as well. There's a methodology behind it, and you can master it. I've gone on to different courses. I've spoken to different people. There is a method behind it, right? And it's whether you can somehow grasp that method. Now, the method isn't 100% foolproof in the sense that, because if it was, then the exam doesn't make sense, right? So you will find that variance in decision making that will be there, but overall, there is some sort of a stepwise process to it. So emotionally, I felt like, because obviously that year I was getting married as well, and I remember my father-in-law asked me at the time, my to-be father-in-law, he said, "How do I know you're not going to take my daughter 100 miles away? What? Because you doctors can get chucked out anywhere." And I kid you not, I looked him in the eye and I said, "Nah, I guarantee you I'll be in London." And he even was like, "Your confidence is crazy." And I said, "Then wait until August and I'll show you." But anyways, so it was good. The difference is that I felt I had a very different experience to you, right? The business, I don't know, you tell me how it was for you, but you see, I'll tell you my experience and you compare it to how it was for you.
So I think let's compare similar rotations so we know the discrepancy is as minimal as possible. So surgery.
Yep. So we both started in surgery. Okay. We both. I was in a busy unit. Okay, very busy unit. I was working for multiple consultants. Can you imagine, like, one firm having like loads of consultants, loads of registrars? And you know what? At first, I found it so hard to build a rapport with them, because every other day, every other week, it was a person I didn't know. I honestly struggled. I was like, who is actually here to look after me? Like, the consultant was there, and he was very, like, he was lovely. I think he was a newly appointed consultant. He was incredible towards me. I don't fault him one bit. But it was like everyone else was, because it's the nature of the training way is here, right? People rotate after 6 months, after 4 months, whatever. And then their rotas also fluctuating. They're in clinic one week, then they're on ward cover, then they're on this cover. So I found it incredibly difficult to build a rapport with my seniors. The other thing is, the unit was so busy. Like, at that time, I wanted to be a surgeon, but I felt so bummed in the sense that my boss was saying, "Get into theatre, man. Like, whatever opportunity you have, get into theatre." But I felt I was responsible for so many patients, right? That where's the time to go into theatre? The only time is after my shift ends, or if I'm off, basically. So I felt I never had time off, and even worse than that, the unit was a unit I was trying to avoid as a med student. I knew I didn't want that unit, right? Because I knew how busy it was, because of how sick the patients are. This is a unit we're talking about multiple comorbidities, multiple things going on wrong. You need an MDT discussion for every single patient, pretty much. It was really bad. These patients were really sick, right? So overburdened, I felt overburdened with stress as someone who's just come from, I'd say, fresh from the textbooks to a real life situation, right? I didn't at first feel like, the honest truth is, I guess, I didn't feel the rapport of support, I guess, right? I didn't feel connected to people where I could just say, I remember you saying stuff like, I just called my SHO and I said, "Yo, what's this?" I didn't even know who my SHO was half the time. It felt difficult at times. And then they've got their conflicting issues as well, where they need theatre time. The CSTs need surgical numbers. They haven't really got time to be out here holding my hand. I understand that, right? They're going for registrar numbers. So I found it incredibly difficult, right? I wouldn't say I was an amazing F1 that took it into my stride and flew. I think I struggled at first. And I don't shy away from admitting that. Hands down, I'd say I smashed medical school. I'm not gonna like say no, I didn't. But when I got into real life, I struggled like never before. I was like, what on earth? I did everything I did in medical school. I turned up to everything, but now I'm a doctor. I can't do it. My confidence was like minimal. I remember feeling really down, man. Vascular patients are so hard to bleed and to cannulate. CKD patients, cancers, etc. They're so hard to put a cannula in. I felt like I was so incompetent. I was like, I can't get a cannula in. The most basic task that an F1 doctor should be able to do. And I just felt so down. But respect, my CST, he is a wicked guy. I think he noticed that eventually. My consultant, some of the guys, and then there was a rotation that happened. I don't know if your regis changed over. My regis changed.
I think, they must have everyone changed at the same time.
And a new batch came on.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Yeah. Respect to these guys, man. And they know who they are, because I see them now as an SHO in ED and stuff. I'm like, oh, I remember you. They looked after me. Like, they always made sure, any issues. They used to check after the theatre list, in between the theatre list. They'd call, they'd come up to the wards, they'd make sure I was comfortable with the plan. And that's when I felt that suddenly I started to grow as a doctor. So I'd say in London, I think the busyness got to me. I think everything was going at such a fast pace around me that it got to me and it crushed me, I felt. Not to say that it crushed everyone. I was working with another F1. She was amazing. I think she kept the unit going whilst I was trying to get to grips with it. She was incredible. She was incredible as an F1. She was not in London, by the way. She was a graduate from outside of London. I think Newcastle, I don't remember. She was incredible. I used to think like, it looks like you've been a doctor for like years on end. Like, how the hell are you doing all of this? And I think she was incredible. So don't get it twisted. Like, it might have crushed me. It didn't crush other people. I think that was my experience, man.
Did you notice like a superiority complex with people that may have studied at university outside of London, or certain medical schools, and were there talks about people that were like, yeah, doctors from outside of London? Did you ever have those type of discussions? What were your thoughts about that, or was everyone still caught up on it? Do you see what I mean?
In terms of hierarchy from where you're from?
Yeah, or like, did you talk about doctors that were allocated outside of London and stuff like that?
No, so the beauty of the SJT exam is you're in a cohort with people from London, Manchester, Newcastle, Leeds, Sheffield, Warwick, you name it. You're in an absolutely mixed cohort, right? The hierarchy, I think, vanishes to an extent. I'll tell you why, though. You have to think about it. I think it vanishes the moment you enter medical school, right? Think about it. Your A-levels don't matter. Yeah. They don't matter. Your GCSEs don't matter. The moment you enter your clinical years, your preclinical years don't matter. The moment you enter F1, it doesn't matter. Everyone's got an MBBS, MBCHB, or whatever you call it. Everyone's starting from a baseline of 0. You might be very in skill, but your baseline 0. Then you start to differentiate. So, for example, now, right, I work in A&E, you don't. The ability to work and the way we think is going to be different. Yeah. You've worked in ITU. I won't be able to function in an ITU department. I am not the person to go into an ITU unless I get a training post or do some sort of fellowship where I get trained in it. Do you understand? So you start to separate at that point. But hierarchy in terms of, again, the beauty of medicine, the beauty of it being a sort of a centralized system is that it doesn't matter if you go to Wales or if you're in wherever you are across the country, Oxbridge or wherever, you're a doctor. You're trained by your medical school to be a safe, competent doctor. By safe, someone who knows how to escalate, someone who knows how to ask for help. They don't look for someone who knows everything from the start. Yeah. Can they ask for help? Can they recognize problems? Right? So hierarchy, no. In terms of, did anyone sit there in my cohort in London and think we're the best doctors in the country? Yeah. Hell no. No one thought that. I don't think anyone really and truly believes that. Question though, where does that rise? Because we know from med school there is that I'm gunning for London. I need to be in the top to get to London.
I don't know where it comes from, but I think obviously there are a handful of med schools in London. It's probably the one city that has the most medical schools. And it's got such a big cohort of medics. And naturally, most people want to stay where they studied and trained. I think that's the natural tendency. Unless they want to go back to like Midlands or Birmingham or Wales where their family home is. But it seems the vast majority of people want to stay in London. But then in our previous videos, it's also about the fact that no doubt some of the best hospitals are in London. Some of the most specialised units are around London, Cambridge, around surrounding areas. And it feels as if, it may not be true or it might be true, it feels as if London is the hub for it all. It feels where the opportunities are. All the Royal Colleges, most of them are in London.
That's true.
RSM, Royal College of Surgeons, other one in Edinburgh, they're all in London, right? A lot of conferences happen in London. Yeah? A lot of networking, a lot of events happen in London. London seems to be the place to go. I don't know if it's a hype, if people, it's a thing we build up ourselves as medics, right? So for me, the experience I had was, I'm gutted, I missed out on London. London is the place to be. I'm prepped and trained in London. And I thought, do you know what? Like, I'm going to have such a bad experience doing surgery in a whole different city.
Good question, though. How did you feel about the idea of, so you went from med school to suddenly having to arrange accommodation, food, everything outside of London. You suddenly became an adult, because the way I look at it is I was living at home still. So I just had to basically turn up to a job, right? How did you feel about that?
That in itself is a whole different ballgame as well. When you're moving to a different city to do foundation training, and I'll give you some tips, it's very difficult to find a place to live, to orientate yourself. You don't know where anything is. You need to. I thought it was going to be London, but now I'm in Coventry, and it's little things, right? When you're in places like those, you need to have a car to operate, to drive to work. It's not like you can catch the buses or the tube. There is no tube. There is no regular buses like London, right? So I had to rush and frantically buy a decent enough car to do the journey and the miles. I was looking at a spare room, trying to figure out where I'm going to stay. You have to rebuild a support network because you know no one there. Luckily, I found two mates that I kind of knew from med school, and by coincidence, we knew each other. We lived together. But for the first 2-3 weeks, I was in hospital accommodation, which was depressing. And I tell you the benefits of it. You need to find a place to live. You need to do, you're relocating your life for the next 2 years, right? In addition to starting, so your problems of being overwhelmed as a foundation doctor. It's that plus a new life in a new city, not knowing anyone, right? But at the same time, the silver lining is living in a city outside of London is a lot more affordable. A lot more affordable. Like the amount of money you spent on travel and on lunch and going out or whatever is probably a fraction of what I spent, because the rent isn't as expensive as if I moved into London. Like going out wasn't as expensive. Activities weren't as expensive. The cost of living is cheaper in places outside of London. And we all know that, right? So everything does have a silver lining to it. But for someone that was born and brought up in central London, trained at King's, did all my placements there, to suddenly have to move and relocate, it's incredibly difficult. So that's one bit. So the tips I'd get for anyone that's in a city they've been born and trained in, that is going to a different city, is prepare in advance. Do not leave things last minute. Look at hospital accommodation. There are always groups set up on Facebook and WhatsApp and Telegram of other junior doctors that are going to be working in the same deanery. You get to know each other. You start to hook up with each other and be like, let's flat share, let's rent a house together, right? I didn't do that stuff. I should have done that. I should have engaged in that community, right? So find your group, find things on Facebook, try get accommodation sorted. That's the priority. Get your vehicle, your travel and all of that stuff sorted. Find out the routes. And I think the one thing I did do was I visited Coventry and the hospitals before, just to get myself familiar. Because you know how it is. When you're F1, you have responsibility from get-go, right? You're expected to work, you're expected to turn up. So familiarize yourself with it. And be practical and prepare for it. I think med school in a way does teach you, because you do get placements outside of London or whatever. But yeah, prepare in advance. Definitely prepare.
And what about your F1 experience? How was that? How was being...
F1 experience? So there's two sides of it, right? So mentally, I was annoyed and probably depressed and slightly frustrated at the fact that I'm away from friends and family. So let me tell you what it is. So imagine you have a busy on-call, right? You want to come home to your family. You want to come home to your parents, your mates. You want to go out, right? For me, and you relax. I couldn't do that until I came home for the weekend. Or until I start living with my flatmates, but they're busy with their own rota, right? So imagine you coming home late at night and it's an empty house and you don't know anyone. You have to cook your own food, heat up your own food, right? And lots of people do it, and it made me realize and appreciate that, especially for doctors that come from abroad. That's even more of a bigger challenge, right? So mentally, that was difficult, right? The F1 role wasn't... Obviously, there's the overwhelming nature of it. You're new, you're learning, everyone's in the same boat. But luckily, I think the pace of life in cities outside of London, especially like a place like Coventry Midlands, isn't as bad as London. So people are a bit more supportive, people are a bit more relaxed. No one's, there's not that much of a dog eat dog mentality. No one's rushing, right? And my registrar was an incredible guy, and he was like a trust grade in the hospital. So he didn't rotate. You know how you had rotations, we don't have that. So we don't have trainees, and I think trainees seem to be a bit more on it for opportunities compared to trust grade doctors who are directly employed by the hospital, right? So my surgical experience was a pleasant one, despite the natural issues. The key thing I remember, and having spoken to other people, was I had the opportunity to go to theatre a lot. There are scenarios where I'm leaving to go home after, like a short day, and the consultant will grab me by the collar and say, yo, there's a gallbladder perf or bowel perf. I need you in there with me because the reg is busy with another emergency laparotomy, right? So the ability, especially we were trying to be surgeons at the time, I got a lot of surgical experience that I don't know how many times you got to go into theatre, but I got to do certain procedures by myself or under supervision. It was incredible. Like, people, you can't buy that opportunity.
That's incredible. Like, if let me tell you, if there must have been 6 or 7 regs plus 2 CSTs. So you can imagine I'm number 10 in the queue if I want to hold the blade. Back then I wanted to be a surgeon, right? So it was never going to happen, right? For you to be the assistant to the main consultant surgeon who's operating, that is incredible. You're trying to tell me there was no one in front of you?
No, there's no one. Like, he needed me in theatre with him. Right?
Yeah, so that's not happening in London.
It's so incredible, right? Hindsight is a good thing, and like we all can always talk from a place of privilege. I remember, like, one of the procedures, so we had 6 consultants. Everyone had their own SHO. Everyone had their own F1 junior docs, right? And obviously the SHOs there weren't that many. I think people didn't turn up or they didn't get the post or whatever, and a handful of regs, right? I remember the regs were upset, were like, yo, I needed your help, man. You didn't come in. We had such a massive hernia repair. I needed you in there. And I was like, yo, I got caught up with a different consultant, and it's mad. They're fighting over you, right? Yeah. So it's incredible. So obviously you can get the same opportunities in hospitals in London, maybe in a DGH, right? But it's like, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is even though I didn't get a placement in London, I feel I got a lot more surgical exposure and experience than someone that was in London, maybe in a fancy hospital like yourself. And I got to pick up skills and assist and learn how to suture and learn how to close. So, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely. Okay, so there are some small variations that clearly exist. So if I say we were both budding surgeons right now, I'd probably be sitting here pissed because I'd be like, in F1, you managed to operate alongside a surgeon, and I've probably at most held a camera, probably held a device, probably helped a little bit, but not as much as you. You got to be primary at one person at one point even. So I didn't get those opportunities, but I think, again, long run, looking at how the CST program works, how the ST program works, speaking to our colleagues who are surgeons, right? Again, it all averages out. Exactly. You might have operated on 20 people as an F1 or F2 even, or as an F3 or whatever, but I would have got my opportunity eventually, F2, CST, maybe I do a trust job, whatever. So I think if you're a little bit upset about your F1 and your F2, it's only 2 years in a long 15-year career that you get to be the architect of. After F2, you're the architect. You're in control of it, right? You get to choose what trust jobs you apply for. You get to choose what exams you're going to sit. You get to choose how you interview and what you want to do. So you're the architect. You're not the architect, really, for F1, F2, because you get some degree of choice in terms of specialties, but you're not really molding it as you want, right? So you're right. There's small differences in that. Tell me a little bit about, because one thing I always was looking over my shoulder is you guys, all the F1s seem to be one unit over there. It was weird. Like, you all like everywhere all together. I felt in London, and it makes sense why in London, because everyone's got multiple networks sitting in London. There was almost no need for me to form a family when I've got multiple families around me. Right, I've got my actual family, got my friends, got my college friends, got friends from here and there, all the project, everyone's around me. So it was literally do your job and then run off to whether it was meeting someone or think, oh, how is it for you guys outside?
Well, I don't know if it's outside. For us, it felt like we were a proper family. A lot of the people there were also in a similar position to me where they didn't get their allocated deanery, so they ended up in Coventry. So you have no one there, you have no friends, you have no family there, right? These are the closest people to you that are experiencing what you're experiencing. So naturally you are bonded and you kind of make lifelong friends, right? Some of the doctors I've met, I'm very good friends with them and we'll be friends forever, I think. So we did have that. And I don't think, so the funny thing is we probably used to talk about how would life have been in London. So maybe you lot didn't talk about us, but we talked about you.
You guys just sitting there.
Like, because you always wonder, right? You're like, it's like, if you're in a big city sound, you're like, yeah, imagine life like that, right? But in a small town, you don't care about the people like that. So it's as if we're looking at you guys, right? And we'll be like, yeah. The main thing was, I bet they have so many opportunities to publish, to do audits, to do research projects, right? Whereas for us, I don't think we had that much of exposure. Or maybe I wasn't in the hospital that was like keen on it.
So that's naturally true though, because of the unit, right? You're obviously going to get these like really, really, what do you call it? Primary large studies going on in large trauma centers, whether it's KCA, GSTT or whatever. You're going to get big, unique trials and studies happening that you can be a part of. My consultant offered me loads of research to get involved in.
Yeah, so exactly.
So that is true.
You got offered a lot of research. As far as I know, maybe 1 or 2 audits. No research projects, no journal, no articles, no nothing. Do you see?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It depends on what type of career you're building, where you want to go. But then again, thinking about, I was in a DGH. But when I was at a trauma center or like a big hospital, I don't think the opportunity was there. But saying that, I think the key thing is, irrespective of where you're placed, you should make the most of it. You should kind of tailor it to your needs. You should kind of bring the most out of everything, because there's always pros and cons to everything. If you're in a place that's outside of London, that's not busy, and you're on a surgical rotation, you want to be a surgeon, get yourself into theatre and then double up on the publications later or in a different way, right? Yeah. So I think it's assess the situation, speak to people another advice is speak to people that have been there, done the rotation. Once people knew that I was in Coventry and I'd done particular rotations, a lot of them reached out to me on social media and said, yo, I'm in that hospital, I'm also in a similar boat to you, I'm moving from London, I'm moving up to the Midlands, and I used to give them tips. I said, XYZ consultant works on XYZ. These are his special interests. You should get involved with them. Yeah. So I think preparing, man, and getting the most of it.
Yeah, I think also what you can do is, so whilst it's very, very okay, and I didn't know at the time myself, it's okay to not know what you want to do in the long run. Yeah. So sometimes you can just take F1 for what it is. The goal is to become a safe, competent, good doctor, right? F1, F2, right? Become those things and then decide what you want to do. But if you, I guess, know where you're going, so for example, some of the surgeons actually know they want to be a surgeon from day, right? What you can do is assess the situation, and then, like I always say it, strategize, right? So for example, you were in a DGH, you could sit down and say, you know what? I'm not going to get the same research opportunities as AMS, but I am going to get so much more theatre. So what I'll do is I'll absolutely slam my logbook full of cases. And then what I'll do is I might spend some time in the next rotation, what I'll do is I'll network out through LinkedIn. I might join someone in London or wherever there's a project going. I might build my research up later, but I'll do that after. So you double down on what you need to and then focus on the holes that you want to plug later on your CV. Whilst if you're in London, you might say to yourself, damn it, I'm down the pecking order in terms of getting theatre experience because there's CSTs and so many different regs, etc. I'm never going to get to do any sort of real operation. But what we can say is, but I can use this as an opportunity to first get involved in rare cases that are probably never going to be seen anywhere else.
Managing the cases.
We had people being like, we're talking about trauma cases that are flown in from different countries.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Right? Different countries. You're not going to see that in a DGH, right? So you can get involved in those cases, watch the case, ask questions, learn about it. Or the other thing is get mentorship. If you want to be a trauma consultant, there is no better place to be than where you are, right? Yeah. You ask that consultant, can you mentor me? Can I just shadow you? Can I just ask questions, right? You are not going to find a better mentor, right? So there's that opportunity. Research opportunities, right? So whilst theatre, you might be down the pecking order, there's other opportunities. But if you're proactive, I wasn't as proactive, let's be honest, because I was being crushed by the ward work, let alone trying to get to theatre. But if you are better than me and you're proactive and you want to be a surgeon, I guarantee you can find space, man. In theatre, there is space if you try. If you're proactive, right, I guarantee you'll be able to find surgical time, research project, if you're proactive. One thing I've learned through just maturing in life, through medicine, entrepreneurship, startups, charity projects, is that you have to be proactive. You can't just take a back seat and think funding will come your way, investors are going to meet you, you're going to get customers, people are going to see your platform. You have to do the legwork.
No,
And
definitely agree.
it's the same entrepreneurship medicine.
Yeah. And I think what you touched on, and the best way to say it or summarize is leverage your unfair advantage. Identify the things that are advantageous or in an easy position for you, be it research opportunities, special cases, case studies, mentorship, or surgical exposure, and double down on it. And like you said, medicine is a career where you need to zoom out. You need to zoom out and see, okay, I'm this part of my career, which is 10, 15 years to consultant, but spans 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So it's just a fraction. But I think the purpose of this video is essentially to show that irrespective of where you are, even if you're not in a big city, it doesn't affect your ability to be a doctor. We genuinely believe by the end of it, you will average out and be good, competent doctors, safe doctors. Absolutely. And then it's on you in terms of how you've done in between those years and how you want to develop and progress further. The main thing is, I don't want you to feel disheartened because you got placed somewhere else. A lot of things are out of your control, and there may be a blessing in disguise. There may be a silver lining to it, and it's your job to go and find it and make the most out of it. So I get it. I've been there. It hurts, and you can't get it over it. And I'm still suffering. You know, it's like I got PTSD. You know, so but nah, as in like, and we know so many people are allocated places they don't want to be, man. It is what it is, and you have to get on with it, man. But enjoy medicine, man. Enjoy medicine and make the most of it. Don't let it hinder your experience.
Perspective is key.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Key. How you look at anything, like we've experienced it with our startups and projects and Peerr especially, right? You look at it at first moment, it seems like, oh damn, why has that happened? 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, thank God that happened, right? So a lot of it is perspective. A lot of it is how you look at it. I think you hit the nail on the head saying, leverage your unfair advantage. And if you're sitting there saying, well, what is my unfair advantage? If you're having trouble identifying what your unfair advantage is, first of all, read the book, right? But second is ask people. Ask people that have been there, that have done it. If you're in London, ask people who are in London. If you're out of London, ask people who are out of London. If you want to do a startup, if you want to do a research, whatever you want to do, the best knowledge you can get is from the people who have been there and done it. And this is the best opportunity to plug Peerr right now. That is exactly what we're doing. Check it out at www.peerr.io. Quick advert there. But yeah, ask the people that have been there and done it. I think that's all from me. Otherwise,
that's it. I think this is a short but sweet reminder: is do not let where you're placed dictate, what type of doctor you are, or your enjoyment, or your learning. Take it in your stride. Make the most of it. 2 years in a career that can span many decades is nothing. And be open-minded and adapt. And like Am said, leverage your unfair advantage. That is the key thing.
And after F2, everything resets again. No one asks you. No one asks you, where did you do your?
No one. To be fair, people do ask, but they don't care. They do not judge me for doing foundation training in Coventry. Exactly. Do you know what I mean? They don't. Do you know what? You're probably a crap doctor because you studied there or you did that, right? You nenever get that. The way things are, they're grateful to have doctors. You know what I mean? So yeah, perspective and leveraging your unfair advantage is probably the most important thing in this.
Absolutely. Otherwise, thanks for watching this episode, and we'll see you next week.